And now, to wrap up this episode, here's Carl King's Album of the Week. This week's Album of the Week is White Bread Blues by Victims Family. That's right, we're going back to 1990 here because I never said which week I was referring to, so why not a week that occurred 32 years ago? I'm sure you're wondering now, who the heck are Victims Family? Well, they were actually the first rock band Carl King saw live in concert back at the Ritz in Ybor City on the Germ tour. I think I still have some bruises from it, actually. So here's what's special about Victims Family. A noticeable thing is that each member of the band has a strong identity. It was like they all thought, how can we do this a little bit differently, or a lot differently? You've got Ralph Spight, the squawking singer and guitarist, and his guitar playing, especially on White Bread Blues, is sort of funky, chorusy, scribbly style, but with these blasts of thick distortion. If you watched his feet, they were constantly switching the pedals for different tones, rapidly back and forth from clean to overdrive to saturated metal. And lots of the songs had a signature trick or little guitar technique to them. And then there's Larry Boothroyd, the bassist, and he plays a bass I think made by Dan Electro called a Longhorn, and it's got this crazy amount of frets, like maybe, I don't know, 32 or 36 or 39 or 48 or 56. Anyway, he had all these twisted, bright bass lines. So go look for a picture of that thing because it is wacky. Here's a little story about that exact bass. I went to a Victims Family band practice in late 2000 out in Oakland, California. The band was taking a break outside the practice space, and I asked Larry if I could play his setup a little bit. Well, I strapped that bass on, and it was the loudest and most magical bass tone I have ever experienced in my life. I played just a few notes through that amp and felt like I was levitating from the sound waves. In fact, Larry came running back into the room in a panic because he couldn't believe how loud it actually was. But here's the thing about Larry's bass. Aside from it having like 3,000 frets or something, I also found it super hard to play because it had really high action. Like, to me, it was just unplayable. But he'd pick it up and it was just effortless for him. And I wondered how the heck he manages to play so fast with a setup like that. All that slapping and slamming of power chords. I definitely stole some of my bass style from Mr. Boothroyd. Then there's the drummer, Tim Soya, and he's got this minimalistic drum kit, a 4-piece. It's just a kick, snare, 2 toms, and a hi-hat and 1 cymbal. And his trick is he plays the hi-hat in different ways to get like ride cymbal sounds and different crash sounds out of it. And of course, all of his drum beats have this cleverness to them. It's never just like a normal drum beat. And I would call his playing very thematic. I think the lineage might indirectly come from Neil Peart, because I hear that melodic inventiveness in drummers like George Hurley of Minutemen and Firehose, Sim Kane of Rollins Band. So maybe Tim was kind of part of that whole thing, maybe even just subconsciously. And that snare drum tone, wow. Victims Family, particularly in that White Bread Blues era, has this wildly shifting, syncopated, jerky style with blasts of punk and groovy pentatonic rock and heavy surf. There's always these comedic pauses and punctuated notes, the staccato stuff, funny bits of quiet noodling interspersed with like frantic screaming hardcore. It's like very noisy musicianship. Little side note is my band in high school got to open for them on the tour after that for their album Headache Remedy, and it was a big deal for us. Anyway, White Bread Blues was the first Victims Family album I got a hold of, and you should get a hold of it too. It's a total classic and a perfect starting point for the world of Victims Family. So Google them or something. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Music or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. And support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. And as always, special thanks to my $51 a month patrons at the special Illusionist level, Chubode and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for listening, and I will clairvoyantly see you next week.